All right, another video. I'm going to try to make this one a short one. I'm really trying to shorten my videos, but it's hard because listen to me, I go off on tangents. But today we're going to talk about police organizations, organizational structure, and just sort of like what police organizations or agencies look like. So this should be pretty short. I know this might not be your most exciting bits, but I promise we'll get into that soon. Alrighty. Let's clickety-clack. Clickety-clack. All right. So one of the most obvious things you know about the police is that they kind of look like the military, right? But not quite, but kinda. It's almost as if they're quasi-military, right? Or sometimes we call it paramilitary. And that is because of, remember we talked about in the previous videos-ish, right? The bobbies, right? The professionalization of the police. And one of the things that Robert Peel did with the bobbies is to make the police more like the military. Focus on training. Focus on professionalism. Focus on being in shape. Focus on there being standards. And so that has continued to carry on in the policing world today. And so we see the police kind of looking like the military, but they're not just like the military. They're somewhat like the military. They're quasi-military. So what are some similarities? Well, they wear uniforms. They also have military-style rank designations, and we'll go over those in a minute. They also have this top-down hierarchical bureaucratic command structure, right? You start with like the chief and it goes down, and we'll go over that as well. They also are very authoritarian, just like the military. And of course, they carry weapons and are allowed to use them. How are they different from the military? Well, the military doesn't always really serve the public, right? Now, there are some branches of the military that do some emergency services for the public, but they're not like the police, whose job, their main goal is to help and serve the public. They also provide services only to those within their jurisdiction, whereas the military does stuff outside of the U.S., right? They, for the most part, right? There's some that operate inside, but for the most part, the military is outside of our jurisdiction. And the police are constrained by laws, right, that focus on individual rights of the citizens. Whereas the military are constrained by international laws or probably some military-based legal standards. And also, people in the police can exercise individual discretion while there is way less discretion in the military. So there's just some similarities and differences. Clickety, clickety, clack! Clickety clack. What the heck? Okay. So remember I said ranks are kind of like the military? Well, look at it. It kind of looks the same, right? So here you got your brass, right? So these are the people like all the way from the police commissioner or police chief, depending on where you are. Not every place has a commissioner. Like these large, super large cities, they will have multiple chiefs and they'll have commissioners. But your average municipal agency will just have a chief. Right, and so anywhere down from commissioner/chief to lieutenant, we'd call those people command staff or brass, right? The reason for that is because back in the day, the little things they would wear on their collars, these little insignia, were made of brass, so we call them the brass. And these are also known as commanders or command staff or administrators. These are people who are in leadership or upper management. Then you get your sergeants. Now that's when you start looking at patches on the side of your sleeves. So you get sergeants can be either in patrol or in investigations or in special units. And your sergeant is typically like your first line supervisor. So think of your if you've ever worked at like a fast food place, right? Your manager was your supervisor, right? And then, or whoever would come in from corporate every now and then, they were your command staff. And then when you see the two little lines here, those can be either officer or corporal, depending on where you go. A corporal is like an assistant regional manager, all right? Or actually, no, more like assistant to the regional manager. While a police officer will usually just have one little dash or nothing, and they are just your regular workers. And you get these designations will go into investigations too, right? Investigations is sometimes considered to be or is for the most part, a separate assignment. Then you also get special assignments, such as being in SWAT, being a field training officer, and you can be anywhere in patrol or investigations to be a part of these special units. You just have to get specialized training. But typically how it works is you start off as a patrol officer, then you take the detective's exam, you become a detective, you do a little bit of work as a detective, then you go back to patrol, you'll usually do some sort of special assignment, you'll become a corporal, you'll become a sergeant in patrol, then you'll move over to become a detective sergeant, right, or maybe a sergeant of a special unit, and then you'll start looking at taking command staff exams, lieutenant's exam, and then you'll get promoted all the way up. Now, there's a difference between deputy chief and assistant chief. First of all, the chief of police is always, or for most of the time, it is the chief of police is appointed by the mayor of a municipality or a city council. And then the chief of police will sort of appoint their own assistant chief. So this is somebody that could be a patrol officer and then gets promoted to assistant chief, whereas a deputy chief is something that you work your way up to, right? So a deputy chief, in my opinion, even though they are outranked by the assistant chief, a deputy chief, in my opinion, is much more impressive, as that's something that you've achieved on your own. A chief of police, these people are appointed, as I said, and I had I knew a chief who was a sergeant, and then they were, boom, all of a sudden chief of police because the mayor liked them. And when that mayor is done with their term, and that chief and then the next mayor decides, I don't want this person as chief, that chief of police would then go back to being a sergeant, which would be kind of weird, right? Like, all these people who are underneath you are now outranking you again. So yeah, that's how that works. Kind of like the military, right? In terms of the organizational structure, as you'll see, it's very hierarchical, very bureaucratic. Just like I explained, you have your command staff here all the way to LT, right? So if you were to look at this, so this might be your patrol, this might be your detectives, and this might be, I don't know, like, they even have like IT folks, right? They have like an IT crew. They're all sworn officers. So you'll have a captain that oversees each individual division. Then you have lieutenants over smaller groups of people, right? So let's say this is investigations. You might have a lieutenant of adult crimes, a lieutenant of juvenile crimes, and a lieutenant of white-collar crimes. I don't know. I'm just making things up. There's one police agency where I did some work, and they had a adult crimes, juvenile crimes, sex crimes, and then like a drug crimes, and then a homicides lieutenant. And then under those, you have sergeants for different subgroups of detectives or patrol. So police agencies are very complex in that they have to carry out multiple jobs. Remember, we talked about they do order maintenance, they do conflict resolution, they fight crime, but they also have to do other things. Like, they have public relations they deal with, right? We're not just talking about patrol here. We're talking about the command staff. We're talking about, special units. We're talking about investigators, right? So everyone has, it's a multifaceted organization. Their main goal is to keep the public safe, right? But they have little small individual things like, oh, we got to solve this crime. Oh, we got to make sure we respond to the public outrage about this. Oh, we got to make sure that crime in this sector doesn't go haywire. Oh, we have to implement this new technology. Oh, we have to save face with city council, right? So they have multiple tasks, and that all focus on one main goal, and that is to keep the public safe. As I said, tasks are divided by divisions, and we looked at that organizational structure, right? It's hierarchical, and when you come to the lower ranks, that's when the tasks become more specialized. Like you can become an FTO, that's a field training officer. So what happens is you become a police officer, you start off, you go to the academy, and then you start working. And as you're working, you'll have another patrol officer that's sort of considered to be a good patrol officer, knows the ropes, and you would then join them in their car for 6 to 8 weeks. It depends on where you are. And so that is a special assignment for that patrol officer. They also have a lot of written rules and regulations. Like I recently helped a police agency revamp some of their policies, and they had like 1,000 pages of rules. It was crazy. And then also, because of all this bureaucracy, because of all these rules, there are pretty clear standards for how you have to move up in the organization. Like some police agencies will have a minimum 5 years on patrol or minimum 3 years on patrol before you can apply to become an investigator. Once you're an investigator, if you want to move up to become an investigator sergeant, you first have to be a patrol sergeant. After you've done a patrol sergeant, you can then choose to go into investigations again or somewhere else, right? So there are clear paths to moving up in the organization that are codified in policies. So when we talk about police professionalism, right, it's slightly different to what actual professionalism is. So police professionalism is sort of the police holding themselves accountable. You know, they're in their uniforms, they are competent, they are hardworking, they are effective. But professionalism in a broader sense refers to the fact that you are an expert in the field of that you're focusing on, right? So I would be considered an academic professional. I have done this for 11 years. I have very good student evaluations. I have my students usually do quite well in my classes, right? So I have a lot of experience, and therefore I can make important decisions about teaching in higher ed because I am a professional. But police professionalism is more like people are accountable, people are dressed nice, they have haircuts, certain haircuts they can have, and that is slightly different from professionalism. Professionalism usually means you can make decisions that are important within your field because of your experience and your knowledge. But in police agencies, patrol officers, even though they look professional according to police professional standards, they don't have a lot of decision-making power. They have more decision-making power than a soldier in the military, but they don't have as much discretion as I would have as a professor, right? I can when I'm grading papers, right, that's pretty subjective. I can look at a paper and say, okay, this student knows what's going on. I can look at another paper and say, oh, this was written by ChatGTP, or this was, I don't know, this student is just parroting what's in the textbook. They don't know what's actually going on. Whereas with the police, there are lots of rules, right? The command staff try to really control how the police make decisions with rules. There's also very little collegial decision making, meaning that because it's a hierarchy, because it's quasi-military, you usually look to written policies when you're making decisions, right? Or the person above you in the hierarchy makes the decision for you. Whereas where I work, right, my department chair will come in and say, hey, what do you all think about creating a survey for all seniors to take at the end of the semester, right? And then me and my fellow professors are like, yeah, that's a good idea. No, that's not a good idea. And you have this collegial discussion, and then you come up with, okay, yeah, we're going to do this senior survey. This is how we're going to do it. But in a police agency, it's like, sir or ma'am, I'd like to do this. And then the command staff would say, yes, that's good. Or no, you cannot do that, right? So there's not as much collegial decision making. And that is because they try to control people's decision making with rules. And again, that having all those rules shows to the public that there are standards, that there's professionalism, that there's accountability. The problems with bureaucracy is that it's very rigid and inflexible, right? It makes things like change or innovation very difficult. For instance, like let's say police officers get body cameras. Now, body cameras, if you have all this body camera video, right, you can do some cool stuff with it. You can you can watch your videos and you can create training modules off of it. But if the written rules don't allow for that, then you cannot do it, right? Sometimes communication can break down when there's up and down communication. There's a lot of telephone game happening, right? And sometimes the information that needs to reach, a different part of the bureaucracy just doesn't get there. Oftentimes, bureaucracies can become inward-looking, right? So they stop focusing on their main goal and they focus more on doing things smoothly. So when I worked at Domino's Pizza when I was younger, we had this device that the corporate wanted us to use called an auto cheeser. So you had like a cup, and then you poured this cup into this machine, this cup of cheese into this machine, and then it would spread the cheese out sort of evenly across the pizza, and it would do it using the smallest amount of cheese possible to cover the pizza, right? So this was an innovation that would help the company cut down on food costs without the customer really knowing that they're getting like 30% less cheese, right? And so they wanted us to use this thing, but we never did, all right? Because when they weren't there, we looked at, okay, what is the easiest thing for us to do? Well, it goes way faster when I just grab the cheese with my hand and I spread it across. Also, when I'm doing dishes at the end of the night, cleaning that auto cheeser was extremely difficult because it had all these little nooks and crannies, and it had all these things that could turn. So like cheese would get stuck in these things. If you didn't wash it out properly, you would get mold and all kinds of gross food poisoning kind of stuff in there. So we just didn't use it. So we just sat in the back, and then whenever we heard, oh, corporate's coming to town, we'd whip it out and we'd use it then. And then the second they leave, we would take it back and wash it because it was such a pain in the butt. Right? It's because we became inward looking. We forgot the whole point of this. That is to make profit, to get pizzas to the customer. Right? But we were like, no. We want to be able to get out of here at a good amount of time at the end of the night. Also, it's way faster for us to just put cheese on the actual using our hands. At the same time, in police agencies, when people want to be creative, the rules and regulations will stymie that creativity, right? And what that means is that if I have a creative way of dealing with a particular group of people in a neighborhood, right, I might sometimes have to step outside of what the law says I can do, right? If anyone has ever seen Breaking Bad, right, where Hank gets in trouble because he keeps on harassing that Gustavo guy, right? The bad guy, right? And that's because he had these creative ideas of maybe Gustavo is behind all of this meth, right? But the rules and regulations of his office wouldn't allow him to go and sit there and watch and see what's going on until he would get some evidence, right? And so it stymied his creativity. In the end, they were like, no, you can't pursue this guy anymore, right? And then when he did, he was pretty much breaking the rules. But there are also informal aspects of police organizations. So informal structures are groups or informal organizations or informal groups. Those are different names you can use interchangeably. These are people who communicate interpersonally frequently, right? So think about maybe you've had a job at a restaurant or wherever, or at an office, and you had like your pals, right? And sometimes those pals could be an assistant manager while you're a waiter, or sometimes that pal can be a CFO and you are just a salesperson, right? But you're in a clique with them. They're your friends, or you're considered acquaintances. And we would refer to that as a vertical clique. Is you're friends with these people, and so the communication you have is very informal. And the good thing about that is that you can get some things done, right? And then horizontal cliques is when you are friends with people who are the same rank as you, right? So one thing that we know is that that in police agencies, patrol officers are quite very informally connected with each other. There's a lot of horizontal cliques in police agencies, not so many vertical cliques, right? Because of bureaucracy, because of all those tight rules and regulations, especially in large agencies, these vertical cliques become easy conflict of interest, right? And sometimes sometimes one friend will be responsible of disciplining another friend, right? So it gets weird. So you see a lot more of this horizontal stuff. But I'd say in other organizations, you might see a lot more vertical cliques in addition to horizontal ones. There might be a bigger mix. But in police agencies, you typically see more horizontal cliques. Think a little bit about some cliques that you've been in at your work. All right. Well, good luck with this. I'll see you all in the next one. Chill bye.